It's among the great mysteries of our time. Whatever happened to Jimmy Hoffa? The Teamster Union president with known ties to organized crime vanished in July 1975. His story has been the subject of a number of true crime books, documentaries, and now a new movie from director Martin Scorsese starring Al Pacino.
Get a gun! Get the gun out of his hand! You always charge a guy with a gun. With a knife, you run away. So you charge with a gun, with a knife, you run.
Today, as you probably know, 44 years later, Hoffa is presumed dead, but the when, how, and why are still mysteries. And while no one was ever ultimately charged, the FBI did have a few suspects. And at the top of their list was Hoffa's closest confidant, Charles Chuckie O'Brien, who is rumored to have driven Hoffa to his execution, and whose car police say they found a strand of Hoffa's hair. But O'Brien's stepson argues the FBI had it all wrong, and they know it. He makes the case in his new book, In Hoffa's Shadow, A Stepfather, A Disappearance in Detroit, and My Search for the Truth. Jack Goldsmith is also a Harvard law professor, former top lawyer at the Office of Legal Counsel, and former assistant attorney general in the George W. Bush administration. Great book. Good to see you, Jack.
Thank you very much.
You know what an out-of-body experience it is to know who you are, and you're a law and order kind of guy, and then read you're the stepson of the guy who was the go-between between Jimmy Hoffa and the mob. I mean, it is surreal. How young were you?
I was 12 years old when Chuckie O'Brien married my mom. That was 6 weeks before Hoffa disappeared.
And did you, but you knew him before. He was around a little bit.
He'd been around
before.
about 6 months.
And
yeah.
How much did you know as a little boy about at least the rumors about Chuckie O'Brien?
Nothing about the rumors. I didn't even really know. Jimmy Hoffa's name was rarely mentioned in those 6 months. But of course, as soon as Hoffa disappeared, 6 weeks after he married my mom, I learned who Jimmy Hoffa was, and I learned who a lot of top mob figures were because they became my uncles.
And what did you and what did you hear? And that's true, by the way. Yeah. They literally became Uncle so and so.
Uncle Tony and Uncle Tony. Yeah.
Uncle Tony and Uncle. They're all Tonys, as it says in the Irishman. You haven't seen the movie,
Not yet,
have you?
no.
Yeah, I saw it the other night. So you had a really close relationship with your stepfather, yes?
Extremely close. He was an extraordinary father during my teenage years.
And then you essentially totally cut him off. And I have to say, your candor in the book that it was all selfishness. I mean, or pretty much selfishness, because you were concerned as a law student at Harvard and maybe a potential rising star in government circles that having this guy's name connected to you would be bad for the resume, for the career, right?
That was the main reason. I mean, I told myself a lot of stories in my 20s when I was basically going through the process of disengaging and blowing him off, essentially. But looking back on it now, it was largely looking out for my career, basically. You
know, when you read about O'Brien, let me just read an excerpt from a letter from O'Brien to you after you wrote your stepfather saying you were changing your last name. You changed it to O'Brien. And
I was O'Brien as a teenager,
right,
and changed it back to Goldsmith.
I cannot say the name change will not affect our relationship. It cannot help but affect the relationship. That hurt will not go away easily. The pain will be there each time I see or hear Jack Goldsmith. It will ever be present. I can handle it. I've had to handle many, many unpleasant things in my lifetime. I've endured heartache and sorrow, and although it won't be easy, I can handle this one more burden, so to speak. I love you with all my heart, and you will always be my son, Jack. It's pretty incredible coming from, at least what we know is arm's length. So my recollection from the book is you're doing some work in one of your government capacities on warrantless wiretaps, and all of a sudden there's a reconnect to O'Brien. How'd that happen?
So I hadn't talked to him or much thought about him in 20 years. I'm sitting in the top floor of the Justice Department working on Stellar Wind, the warrantless wiretapping program, trying to learn about Fourth Amendment law to become more expert on it, and I came across two cases, Hoffa versus United States and O'Brien versus United States.
As in that O'Brien?
As in Jimmy Hoffa and my stepfather. And Chuckie had always told me about this famous Supreme Court case he had. He'd always told me about how Bobby Kennedy illegally surveilled him. He always told me how the government took shortcuts in secret. And I basically dismissed all that when I was a kid, and there I was in the top of the Justice Department.
And then finally you reconnected with your stepfather.
Yeah, soon after we reconnected.
So why have you concluded what virtually all of the public who's been fixated on this has been on the opposite side of, that your stepfather likely had nothing to do with the execution of Jimmy Hoffa?
So there are a lot of reasons. The case against him was always circumstantial, and I go through the book in detail, and I think I defeat the circumstantial evidence. Turns out that there's a lot of circumstantial evidence. There's a lot of evidence that suggests that he actually couldn't have been there. The timeline is almost impossible.
Pick him up at the Red Fox restaurant and drive him.
He didn't have time. The known places where he was and Jimmy Hoffa was. But the main reason in addition to all the other reasons I uncover, is the FBI for 20 years hasn't believed he did it.
So why haven't they said it?
But that's a very good question. They promised him they would say it if he went and talked to them. They've had a completely different theory of the case. He cooperated, and they just didn't come through.
Speaking of why haven't they said it, you know what everybody who picks up your book is looking for. Who killed Jimmy Hoffa?
Right.
We get to page 294, about 4 sentences in the middle of a paragraph. You talk about some low-level mobster in Detroit. You know who it is, right?
Yes, I do.
And the FBI knows who it is.
Correct.
You won't tell us who it is, and they won't tell us who it is.
They might one day. I hope that they do tell
But why
everything.
don't they?
I think they should, and I hope that they will. Everybody except Chuckie is now dead, and there's no reason why they shouldn't. And it would clarify a lot of things, and I hope that they do.
But he's not somebody who's a household name kind of thing.
He's not a household name. He's not someone that's been on the radar screen in the Disappearance.
Do you want to spell it backwards? I didn't think you would. So,
there's a good reason why I'm not saying it. I think the FBI accused Chuckie for 40 years based on evidence I couldn't see, and they turned out to be wrong, and I can't write a whole book basically exonerating him and then turn around and finger a guy that I haven't seen the evidence for.
And speaking of that, I'm assuming this whole experience and these years of research and the years of personal involvement has to have changed your perspective on the criminal justice system, did it not? And governments.
It became a lot more personal. I mean, I was not naive about how the Justice Department works. I was in the middle of what seemed like illegal programs, and I know how criminal justice works. But when you see it happening to your family, and when I saw what Chuckie went through for basically 40 years of false government leaks and accusations that turned out not to be true and never got corrected, and saw how it ruined his life, I did become more appreciative of how bad the criminal justice process can be.
And we'll end with, in a classic, almost movie-like scene, he is still alive. You have had a rapprochement, and there's still things he will not tell you because of the code of silence.
Yes,
right?
There's a lot he hasn't told me.
You're not going to ask either, are you?
I asked him a lot. He told me a lot. He'd revealed a lot more than he planned to.
But you know where the line is.
I know where the line is, and I'm not going to ask him.
By the way, we're out of time. You also do a terrific job, not only not reinventing, but expanding the picture of Hoffa. Most people today know him just as this mob-connected guy, but you tell a beautiful story about what he did for working people in this country.
Yeah.
Jack, it's a great book.
Thank you so much.
Thanks
I appreciate
so
it
much.
very
Really
much.
Good. Jack Goldsmith, get it. The book again is In Hoffa's Shadow, A Stepfather, A Disappearance in Detroit, and My Search for the Truth.